So, my name is David McQueen. For those of you who may not know me, I um, am a leadership coach. I do a lot of work around leadership development, around cultural inclusion, and around presentation skills. And I am very passionate about centering leadership and how, within the world of work and within our communities, it's so important to think about the role of leadership and how it affects us, not just how we lead by title, but how we lead by our responses to situations. And today I want to do a video, and I don't usually do long videos, but I think it's important to have a walk through the importance of this one. And this one I want to center Black people of African and Caribbean descent, specifically in the UK and US, who are affected by what I would call a collective trauma, an outpouring of grief and of rage that has been sparked by a number of incidents, but essentially affect every single areas of our life, not just in work, but also in our community, the way that we engage in so many different parts of our daily lives. And whilst normally people will shy away with this on a professional platform or whatever, I think it's important to have it because we're humans. And just trying to box ourselves into those small categories aren't helpful because we need to have that deeper conversation. So walk with me, bear with me, as I try to share some thoughts about healing, as I try to share some thoughts about how we can address some of the issues that we have, or should I say the majority of the issues that we have around that uncomfortable conversation around race. And specifically for today, as I said, this video is going to be focusing on the Black experience. Yes, there is a larger conversation to be had, but for now, I'm specifically focusing on that. And I hope it helps somebody. It's quite cathartic for me to be able to get this out of my system, but also to learn, also to share, to see how we can build each other. So essentially, what I'm going to do is I'm going to break this down into about 4 or 5 parts. And I'm not even going to leave comments for now because I just think it's just going to be about some of the thoughts that have come from my mind and how we can move forward with this. Let's start with point 1, a point of focus. And the focus is here, we are talking about the collective trauma felt by Black people across the diaspora. And that in part was, or has been, triggered by a number of events. A couple of weeks ago, we were thinking about the video that a lot of people saw around Ahmaud Arbery being chased by individuals within a neighborhood who assumed that he was a criminal and took law and order into their own hand and decided that they were going to shoot this young man in broad daylight, and finding out that it happened a while back, and the systems that were in place that stopped justice from taking its place or its rightful space in being able to deal with this situation. Then we have the likes of Amy Cooper, the lady who was in Central Park, who, while being approached by a Black gentleman who was just warning her about being able to respect the space, was created a situation where she essentially almost threatened the life of this African American man by creating this space and suggesting that, her life was under threat. A story that resonated with many people who felt that this had been done before, whether it is the prioritization of the safety and the narrative of the white woman from the beginning of the suffragette movement to your modern day. And we have Tom Austin, who a well-known venture capitalist who was training in a gym in one of the WeWork spaces and was affronted by the fact that there could be Black members of the gym in there who could train, who could practice without necessarily having to show them where his card was or what room they were actually in. He felt that he was entitled to tell them that while they were in that actual space. And rather than wait for a response, decided that he was going to call the police and level it up to a space where they probably would get arrested for being in a place that they had paid for and they were entitled to. And then obviously the last one about George, the young man who lost his life, as many of us have seen tragically, by video over the last week or so. Here in the UK, we've also had a number of issues around the collective trauma. For example, for a number of years, we've had an ongoing issue with members of my parents' generation called the Windrush generation, those who came from the Caribbean in the late 50s and 60s, who, having been promised to come over to the UK to be part of the Commonwealth, have in many instances been treated really badly, and some people have been deported back. There have been a number of deaths in custody where police have still not been prosecuted. There was the issue of Grenfell. And of course, we know about the disproportionate levels of stop and search for members of the black community, especially even now. And we've seen videos of a number of frontline workers who have been stopped and searched by and treated disproportionately by police in this time of pandemic. And we also know that on the front line, in terms of both work and the way the rates of infection, and again, there are lots of factors that do build into this, how many members of the black community have been disproportionately affected by this COVID-19 infection. So for many people, this cultural trauma is something that is first and foremost in our mind. And for me, it's important to understand why there is a frustration from many of us within the black community. And I'm not speaking for everybody. I'm speaking for many of us who do have this sense of frustration. Others will dismiss it, and that's absolutely fine. But for those of us who it's a concern, it's important to be able to address this. And having this conversation, it is unearthed that not only in the UK, but across Europe and the US and Brazil, there being a heightened sense of awareness around the treatment of our navigation of life as black people. Not in some homogenous way, but recognizing that systemically there are certain things that affect us that have commonality. And so my purpose in this kind of video is to create a space so that we can listen to these concerns. Is to put some points of view out there, not to create some big argument, so people can actually understand it. And yes, racism is a problem, full stop. But right now, the focus of this video, and right now, the sentiment that we're having now, is about the centering of black lives. So let me take it back and give a sense of framing as to how a lot of black people who are affected by this collective trauma will see life. So, for example, if you are the son or daughter of parents who have come to the UK, for example, from the Caribbean, Africa, or any black dominant populations, there's a mantra that we are told from quite young that we have to work twice as hard to get half as much. And in many ways, although many of us, I know people like myself, my wife, we will never say that to our children, but the reality is for many individuals is that you're already starting on a back foot. So you always feel that you've got to work even harder in class, got to work even harder at work to impress people. And then you have this kind of but you have this additional messaging that, you'll only be successful if you work hard. And so, you'll only be able to get to spaces if you work hard. And there's this weird double consciousness that when you are walking in these spaces, not only are you going to be fully aware of the fact that you are a man or a woman, but there's the blackness that comes with it, and being aware of how we navigate these spaces and the conversations that we have. And there are people like myself who will get a pass because I have a very anglicized name, David McQueen. It allows me to travel to certain parts of the world where people don't even recognize who I am before I've spoken, but it opens doors. The fact that there are people who are enamored by the fact I am a good speaker, I'm a professional speaker, so obviously I'm a good speaker, but those things will, for them, be, oh my God, I didn't realize that, people like you spoke so well, which I have been told more than once. And it gives that notion of the magic Negro, this individual who will be non-offensive, who will be compliant to the ideal that you have of what a good black person would look like. And so how that pans out is that there are many people who will encourage that way. Don't push back, don't swear, don't argue. Make sure you're always suited up. Make sure your hair is professional and it's non-offensive. Don't argue. Make sure that people don't feel threatened by you. Avoid conflict to feel the peace. And at some point, for many of us, that boils over and it becomes too much. And we want to take action around that. For many, they're okay with it. But for many of us, it becomes a turmoil. It becomes a trauma. And in many respects, a lot of us have ways of dealing with this differently. But without a shadow of a doubt, it is a problem. And that double consciousness does weigh itself down because disproportionately within our Black community, we are diagnosed and treated, or sometimes not treated, around things like mental health and stress and anxiety that come from having that double burden. Yes, there are some who can sail through it okay, but there are a lot of us who aren't. And so how does it pan out? Because I think it's important to go to what I call the third point, understanding the challenges. Because when we have had enough, how do we push back at this? And when we are talking about race, which a lot of people try to avoid, there are people who will get their back around things like whiteness and privilege. And it's important to understand the context here because people think, oh my God, I'm not racist. Just because I'm white, I shouldn't be having to take on the burden of a whole nation. No, we're talking about a system that is shaped around very wealthy white people in dominant countries that we are very aware of have influenced policy across the world. Let's think about, at the end of the day, many things that have been placed in countries that are now, in many instances, who are free, but there is an element of post-colonialism or that attention to be more white that affects us across the board. So in the white community itself, there is an aspiration for white working class to aspire to be even more middle class or to try to get towards upper class, because that notion of that whiteness or what that good whiteness looks like forms a specific hierarchy. And then you think outside of that, in South Asian communities, the veneration when your skin is lighter and the industries around skin bleaching and being able to be in positions of power in business and media or what have you is around making that affinity or that closeness to whiteness. We think of South Asian communities, Southeast Asian communities again, where that whiteness or closeness to white skin is venerated. And then we think of black and brown other black and brown communities where people will skin bleach and where there is a veneration or treatment of people who are lighter skinned, who historically, because of colonialism, and because of the way that things were done, it was closest to white. That's what we're talking about when we talk about whiteness. We're talking about this notion where the closer to that space you get, the more you are accepted. Now, you can go and read it for yourself, but over 100 odd years ago, being Italian, being Irish, being Jewish was not considered white. But you see how this thing over time has increased, and there is a notion of being in that space where people feel, oh my God, the more I get to success is the more I have to be, in terms of behavior and in terms of look, as close to this whiteness ideal as possible. And then the privilege that comes with it, where you aren't second guessed, where people don't look at you differently because you are from a different background. These are the kind of challenges that a lot of Black people have had to deal with. And these are the kind of conversations we have to have honestly. And very often there is that frustration because people are like, look, just because I'm white, I don't feel that it's going to be negative. No, we're going to have a conversation about how we navigate that space. But right about now, in that conversation, we want people to understand what it feels like coming from a Black point of view. And whilst I'm here, I think it's important not to get people to get it twisted, because we have issues in what we in the UK we call as BAME, and BAME is just as problematic. And for those of you who don't understand BAME, BAME is everybody else in the UK who's non-white British. So you're talking about Irish, you're talking about Arabic, you're talking about Southeast Asian, Chinese and Korean, you're talking about South Asian, so the Desi community of Pakistani, Indian, and Bengali. You're talking about other white communities that come in here to the UK. That's just as problematic, because there are issues in those communities, whether they are living within there, where Black people are treated differently as well. And we've had to negotiate and are constantly negotiating that, being followed around in stores when we go in to buy hair products or food products, having the assumption that the individual who is calling us a disparaging name in their local tongue under their breath, that we don't recognize this. recognizing in so many issues that when we're talking about anti-racism, a lot of black voices will be very vocal on the front pushing for the equality. Lots of other people will be quiet, but then they benefit. They benefit from it. And for us, that can be very frustrating. And having that constant conversation with not just white, but with varying forms of Asian and white European, Hispanic, or whatever it is, having those conversations across the board for us are critical, because right about now, we are hurting, and we're saying, look, we're not looking to have no big fight, but we need to have a sense of healing. You can't keep on going on about the human race and dismissing the fact that there are certain elements within the community that affect us as a whole. And when you even take it further, these prejudices that are embedded within the system, and again, when I talk about whiteness, I'm talking about a system that prioritizes white as good and black as negative. It has a massive effect. In the UK, we know, for example, that by the time a lot of young black boys get to year 9, they are treated like adults. The behavior around their responses, they're treated like adults. There are statistics out there, I don't have the data in front of me right now, but if you could see the amount of young Caribbean or boys of Caribbean, mixed or African descent that are excluded from school by year 9 and then put into pupil referral units or alternative schooling, which pushes them to a life of crime, and no intervention is made, there are a lot of young men who already at that stage, at the age of 13 or 14, are being disadvantaged again. And again, we can start talking about health. You know, in the UK, because of the assumptions around pain, because of the assumptions around how people are treated, black women are 5 times more likely to have mortality when they are giving birth to children than white women. That's a serious fact. That's a serious point of data. That's not a genetic issue. That's because systemically we have had assumptions around the way that medicine is done, how the way that people will offer care. And again, let me make it clear, this is not just by white people. There are black and Asian and other groups who will still tap into that kind of narrative and reduce the outcomes of individuals as a result. The way we are sectioned around mental health because of assumptions. Law and order, the amount of black people that are stopped. And look, we can be the best person and done everything that's got to be done, but we will still get stopped. And we will still get treated unfairly. We will still get arrested or stopped disproportionately for the possession of drugs, whether it be for recreation or other, even though we use it a lot less in proportion than the white majority. And then there's travel. I talk about myself, I love, as a speaker, I get the opportunity to travel around the world. But I'll tell you for a fact, whenever I go to Europe, okay, whenever I go further afield, even when I went to Australia, when I've gone to Southeast Asia, when I've gone to America, I've done my research just to see what the ground is like. Is it safe for me to go out? What are race relations like? What have other people's experiences have been like? I do that as a default because I want to protect myself as a black man traveling. Now, some people could say that as paranoia, but when you've gone to places where people have stared at you or treated you differently or walked with you behind you in a shop or made assumptions about you, until I open my mouth and I start to ask questions, again, putting on that magic Negro hat and then starting to speak to people in this very good Queen standard English where people realize, oh, okay, so he's slightly different. That is a lot of the burden that we actually have to bear. And often we may not talk about it, but that stuff cuts deep. And there are going to be times where, for individuals who go through that, it does cut very deep. Unless you have a conversation about it, that stuff will hurt you. It does hurt. And being individuals who shape a lot of culture around music and entertainment, it was a beautiful statement I heard a little while back, and I said, you cannot appreciate my rhythm unless you understand my blues. And having that conversation, like any friendship, and I will say it to people who are on my line who are friends of mine, it's about having that honest conversation. If you are a friend of mine and you are afraid to have an honest conversation with me about race, then you don't understand my friendship. And for a lot of other people, it's not understood. And sometimes there will be rage. Sometimes people will get angry. Sometimes they do need to have an outlet. And it's important in terms of support to be able to understand that. I'll go on to my fourth point. Because by now, I've given you the background. I've been able to explain to you why we're at this space now, around the point of focus. I've talked about the double consciousness, the way we've had to navigate this world. I'm talking about the challenges that we do while navigating these spaces as minorities, okay? And I'm not even going to get into the fact that the minority in a country is usually the majority around the world. I'm talking specifically about these communities. So let's think about the conversation. If we are going to have a conversation about race, ask better questions. Create a safe space. I want to talk about how you are navigating this space. Don't ignore it. I'm a human. I know about you. I know about your background because for so many of us, our parents have made us very aware of how to be able to navigate and walk through other communities and cultures other than our own. Why? For survival. So ask us about ours. And don't be defensive. When we raise an issue like this, it's not about the assumption that you immediately think we're playing the race card. Sometimes it's the only card we even have. But it's not about playing the race card or that we have a chip on our shoulder. It's about listening and being open enough to understand that somebody in front of you is hurting. Somebody in front of you has a sense of healing. Somebody in front of you wants to be able to get that friendship to go a bit deeper so that they can be recognized and treated as an equal and treated with equity. Yes, we are all different, but as humans, should we deserve to be treated differently just because we have a different color of the skin or background? I think that's nonsense. And it's important to have a conversation about how do we move it forward. So ask better questions and be open enough to be able to understand what the person's saying without trying to center yourself. I've seen it so many times online where somebody's going to come along and you're talking about this black pain and then somebody wants to center themselves about, oh, I've seen it and this is what's me as a white woman. Or somebody wants to go, okay, and this is what happens to me as a member of the LGBT community. Or somebody else will go, oh no, this is all about people of color. No, right now, this is centering about black people. Simple as. It really is. And we need to avoid those logical fallacies that come up when you are talking specifically on this subject. All lives matter. Of course, all lives matter. We know that. But right now, we're centering the concept around black lives, specifically around police brutality, and the way that we navigate the world. If your house was on fire, okay, and a fire engine pulled up outside of it, all the houses in that road shouldn't be treated exactly the same. The house that's on fire needs to be dealt with. And right about now, for many of us, our houses are on fire. And we need to be able to have that sense of focus. Trying to come with the logical fallacies talking about all lives matter and trying to deflect away from it, or even bringing up silly things like black on black crime, however you define that. Okay? It's nonsense. Nobody comes and says, Indian on Indian crime or white on white crime or Chinese on Chinese crime. It's so important not to be distracted by those individuals who just want to stoke racial hatred, those individuals who just want to deflect away from it. This is about listening to individuals. So do your research. There are so many resources out there that can allow you to have that point of conversation. And if you're afraid of talking to somebody that's close, there are individuals like me and others who are more than happy to start the conversation with you. But you have to start it. And if there's one thing for me that's so important in this point in time as well, as so many of you faith leaders, whether you're Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, for all of you who believe that, at the end of the day, there is this divine power who allows us to be able to love each other. You know what? Take some ownership around the conversation around race. It's really good for you when you're getting your offerings and your support and your tithe and all these individuals who will support you and talk about how great you are. But then there are members in your community that you will ignore. And you will maintain that racial divide. And you won't educate them as to how to treat people the same. It's a mess. You're a hot mess if you cannot take a stand in that point in time. Individuals who are celebrities, individuals who are business, who have ridden off the back of black culture. If you cannot take a moment to read the room and to park your own agenda and say, come on, let's have a conversation, then you're part of the problem. You are part of the problem because you've been able to benefit. You've been able to ride off the back of this creativity and innovation and stuff and this support. And then all of a sudden, when someone's really hurting, you don't want to put your foot forward. You don't want to make a statement. All you want to do is push people to what you're selling on Amazon or the album you're launching or the panties that you're trying to sell. There's something really problematic about that. But what it does show for many of us is that you really don't care. You really don't care. And for me, doing your research is important. Recognizing and reading the room. Go and read about the anti-racism resources out in the US and the UK. There are books, there are podcasts, there are so many out there that there are too many to mention. But go and do the work. It's not for us, for the individuals who are in pain to do the heavy lifting for you. You have to go and find that for yourself. More than happy if you are a friend to go, look, where can we have as a starting point? And yeah, that might be a bit of a guide, but try and do the work for yourself. Google is your friend. Use it. Simple as. Or Bing if you don't like Google. Or Yahoo. And the last one I want to talk about is the role of organizations. I started off this video talking about the opportunity I have to work with a lot of organizations around the world, around leadership and around shaping culture. And you know what's happened historically is that a lot of conversations around making sure that organizations are a lot more diverse and a lot more inclusive have only focused on gender. That's bollocks. That's bullshit. It's important for people to recognize that diversity covers so many things and it's intersectional. We have to recognize at this point in time, there are a lot of individuals who are concerned about where they will go when people tell them if you work hard, you'll get to this certain space. And you need to have those honest, facilitated conversations. Because we look at all these industries and we see this large, like especially where I live in London, we see this large recruitment of Black and Asian and other coming into these organizations at, maybe 30, 40% of their recruitment, talent recruitment on their graduate recruitment programs. And then the further you go up the chain, the less you see of people who look like me and others. And whilst individuals can go, oh, it's a meritocracy and it's just down to hard work, no. Because I can tell you for a fact, I know of recruitment agencies that have said to me that they have been guided, as illegal as it is, by hiring managers not to hire West African people in financial firms because they are afraid of them going in there and doing fraud. Not to hire Muslims because they may be a problem. Not to hire Black women because they may be too contentious. These are things that happen, and people, sometimes when people drink, they spill and tell a lot. But these are the situations that we have. This is about being able to understand that when you talk about things like what makes for professional or unprofessional. When I raise my voice and I'm making my point, you can call me aggressive all you want. I'm going to argue my point. I'm not going to be shying away. And it's important to recognize that sometimes people are going to be firm. Not all points of conflict are going to be small, quiet little chatters that we have by the water cooler. Sometimes these are going to have to be robust and very uncomfortable conversations that we need to have, where we start to ask questions and we start to dissect that stuff and we start to live up to the values that you have on your company site or your organizational site. And recognize in some situations there is institutional racism that needs to be addressed. Because that's the way of the world. And if you want to be honest and accountable and integrity, you have to have those uncomfortable conversations, but obviously also work towards an outcome. Talk is cheap, but action is priceless. There is a lot of movement in industries, especially here in the UK and the US. We talk about diversity, D&I. I want to see it more about it being DNA. What have you embedded in your culture in the first place to allow people not to feel like an imposter, to allow people to be able to speak up with respect around challenges that they see? How do you do that as an organization? You've got employment resource groups and business resource groups and individuals that can foster that conversation when they speak to senior leaders or decision makers. It's not just about sitting down and assuming, starting to have that honest conversation and not being afraid to say to individuals, how do we move this forward? I'm sitting here and willing to listen. Obviously because I've had to sign NDAs with a number of my clients, I'm not going to mention their names, but there are amazing organizations out there in law and in technology and in banking and in public government who are recognizing that they need to move forward. And they're starting to ask these conversations. And I'm really just privileged to be in that position where we can start to move that forward. Because it's not about me. The bigger picture is about making sure people are treated with respect. Look at your hiring practices. Look at your supply chains. If there are individuals in there that can bring the talent and you've looked wider afield than just the individuals that go and work with you or the referral program, just make sure that the same kind of people come in all the time. Look and see how these individuals and other stakeholders can make an impact. Think about how it can go wider. Don't make meritocracy a myth. And it's important to listen. More than anything else, it's important to listen. And even while I'm recording this video, I know there are going to be conversations that come off and kick off the back of this. But it's so important to listen. You've got to listen, active listening to what other people are saying. And don't assume that it's just negative. It might be 2 or 3 points. It might have to be facilitated. It might be something that, it will be very uncomfortable. But a lot of Black people around the world are hurting right now. And whilst it may be uncomfortable for some, and don't get me wrong, there are some Black people who are going to say, this is not an issue for me. It doesn't bother me at all, what have you. I'm absolutely cool with that. But a lot of us are. A lot of us are putting our lives at risk. I know for me, I'm not going out there to protest with nobody out there with no mask and without no social distancing. But some people are willing to put that stuff online and to risk. Some people are going the extreme because they have so much rage and they will go and they will riot. I'm not going to make any judgment about that. If somebody's upset, I can understand that because for me, to be honest with you, people are more important than property. Not saying that I make an excuse for it, but I understand. There are people who are hurting. There are people who need that sense of healing. And it's not just about the police brutality, but it's about being able to navigate this space effectively. professionally and personally. And all we ask, if for everybody, where possible, with your friends and in your community, is to sit down and have a conversation as to how we can move it forward. And it's not that hard. If you really believe in the values that drive you forward, that make sure that you protect your family, that's about the human race as a whole, it's about integrity, and it's about honesty, and it's about treating people how they want to be treated, you will not be afraid to have these conversations. Push that fear aside and make an effort. I hope this has been a bit of help. And if it hasn't for somebody, then so be it. It's not about saving the world, but it's about being able to impact my world and the individuals who are around me. Let's have those conversations. I've broken it down into 5 steps, 5 simple steps. Understanding this point of focus, really understanding how individuals, Black people, are walking through this life with a sense of double consciousness, but wanting to live the same fullness of life as other people. Looking at the challenges that we face, not only at work, but across education, across health, across law and order, travel, all these things, and understanding how we see it and how often we have to navigate this stuff, which can be quite burdensome. But then starting a conversation for a solution. Not just thinking about the negative, not just thinking about it in terms of guilt, but how do we move this forward? And then realistically, as organizations, getting together and seeing how can we really help each other out. Because yes, all lives matter, but right about now, Black lives matter specifically for us. Appreciate you listening. I hope this was some help. And I look forward to the continuing conversation and seeing how people work this out for themselves. All the best, stay safe, and stay well. Thank you.